Today we'll be reading Chapter 3 of Economics for Today, the 11th edition. Market Demand and Supply. Chapter Objectives. 1. Describe how individuals and market demand curves are constructed. 2. Explain how changes in non-price determinants of demand will affect demand. 3. Describe how individual and market supply curves are constructed. 4. Explain how changes in non-price determinants of supply will affect the supply. 5. Analyze how demand and supply determine the market equilibrium price and quality. 6. Predict how a change in the supply or demand, or both, impacts market equilibrium. A cornerstone of U.S. economy is the use of markets to answer the basic economic questions that result from the problem of scarcity. Consider gasoline, hairs, soft drinks, and sneakers. In a market economy, each bought and sold by individuals coming together as buyers and sellers in markets. This chapter is extremely important because it introduces basic supply and demand analysis. In the market of goods and services, demand represents the choice-making behavior of consumers, whereas as supply represents the choices of producers. Let's get started to see how the interaction of demand and supply in the marketplace determines prices and quantities exchanged. 3-1. Demand. Economists are known for using graphs to illustrate many economic concepts. It should come as no surprise, then, we start our discussion of demand with a graph. 3-1a. The demand curve. We are all consumers, people who make purchases in a market by buying goods or services such as a bus ticket, a cup of coffee, a t-shirt, a sandwich, or a haircut. You probably already know about how markets work then you realize. Consider, for example, what happens when an item is put on sale. It is likely no surprise to you that consumers buy more than the price of merchandise is cut. Economists use a graph to represent this basic relationship. A demand curve is a curve or schedule showing the different qualities of a product consumers are willing to purchase at various prices during a specified period of time, ceteris paribus. Exhibit 1 reveals an important law in economics called the law of demand. The law of demand states that there's an inverse relationship between the price of a good and the quality buyers are willing to purchase in a defined time period, ceteris paribus. In Exhibit 1, the demand curve is formed by a line connecting various price and quality purchase choices of an individual consumer. The demand curve, therefore, allows you to find the quantity demanded by a buyer at any possible selling price by moving along the curve. For example, Bob, a sophomore at Marketplace College, enjoys fun t-shirts. Bob's demand curve shows that at a price of $15 per shirt, his quality demand is 6 t-shirts purchased annually. Point B. Exhibit 1. An individual buyer demand curve for t-shirts. Bob's demand curve shows how many t-shirts he is willing to purchase at different possible prices. As the price of t-shirts declines, the quantity demanded increases, and Bob purchases more t-shirts. The inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded conforms to the law of demand. At the lower price of $10, Bob's quantity demanded increases to 10 t-shirts per year. Point C. Following this procedure, other price and quantity possibilities for Bob are read along the demand curve. Note that until we know the actual price determined by the demand and supply, we do not know how many t-shirts Bob actually purchased annually. The demand curve is simply a summary of Bob's buying intentions. After we know that the market price, a quick look at the demand curve tells us how many t-shirts Bob will buy. Take note. A demand curve shows the different quantities of a product consumers are willing to purchase at various prices. The negative slope of a demand curve reflects the law of demand, where a decrease in the price of a product measured by the vertical axis causes an increase in the quantity demanded of the product, measured on the horizontal axis. 3-1b. Market demand. Exhibit 1 showed the demand curve for one individual consumer, Bob. There are, however, many consumers who purchase t-shirts. To make the transaction from an individual demand curve to a market demand curve, we total or sum all the individual demand schedules. Suppose the owner of Zapmart, a small retail chain of stores, serving a few states, tries to decide what to charge t-shirts and hires a consumer research firm. For simplicity, we assume Fred and Mary are the only two buyers in Zapmart's market. And they send a questionnaire that asks how many t-shirts each would be willing to purchase at several possible prices. Exhibit 2 reports their price demand quality demanded responses in a tabular and graphical form. The market demand curve, B total, in Exhibit 2 is derived from summing horizontally the two individual demand curves, B1, B2. For each possible price, at a price of $20, for example, we sum Fred's 2 t-shirts demanded per year and Mary's 1 t-shirt demanded per year. To find the total quantity demanded at $20 is 3 t-shirts per year. Repeating the same process for the other prices generates the market demand curve, B total. For example, at a price of $5, the total quantity demanded is 12 t-shirts. It is important at this point to be clear about the terminology economics use. If we change the price of t-shirts from, say, $20 to $5, there will only be a change in the quantity demanded in the market from $3 to $12 t-shirts. A change in the quantity demanded is a movement from one point to another along the stationary demand curve, ceteris paribus, that results from a change in the price of a product, in this case, t-shirts. Take note, a market demand curve is derived by horizontally summing the individual demand curves of all consumers in the market. 3.1c. Shifts of the demand curve. Price is not the only variable that determines how much of a good or service consumers will buy. Recall from Exhibit A4 of the appendix to Chapter 1 that the price and quantity variables in our model are subject to the ceteris paribus assumption. If we relax this assumption, we will allow other variables previously held constant to change, and then a variety of factors can influence the position of the demand curve and cause it to shift. Because these factors are not the price of the good itself, they are called non-price determinants, or simply demand shifters. A change in demand is an increased rightward shift or a decreased leftward shift in the quantity demanded at every possible price. If ceteris paribus no longer applies, we consider the 5 major non-price determinants that shift the demand curve. 1. Number of buyers. 2. Taste and preferences. 3. Income. 4. Expectations of buyers. 5. Prices of related goods. Exhibit 2. The market demand curve for t-shirts. Individual demand curves differ from consumers Fred and Mary. Assuming they are only buyers in the market curve, D total, is derived by summing horizontally the individual demand curves, D1 and D2. For example, at the price of $20 per t-shirt, Fred would like to buy 2 t-shirts, point A, and Mary would like to buy 1 t-shirt, point B. The total quantity demanded in the market then is 3 t-shirts, point C. This process is repeated at various prices to construct the market demand curve, as you see in the table below. Number of buyers. Look back at Exhibit 2 and imagine the impact of adding more individual demand curves to the individual demand curves of Fred and Mary. At all possible prices, there would be additional quantity demanded by the new customers in the market. Demand curve for t-shirt shifts rightwards and increase in demand. So, for example, population growth might increase the number of buyers and shift the demand curve rightward, while trade restrictions imposed by other nations might decrease the number of buyers and shift the demand curve leftward. Taste and preferences. A favorable or unfavorable change in a consumer's taste or preferences means more or less of a product is demanded at each possible price. Fans, fashion, advertising, and new products can influence consumer prices to buy a particular good or service. Beanie Babies, for example, became the rage in the 1990s, and the demand curve for these products shifted to the right. But once people got tired of them, the demand decreased, shifting the demand curve leftward. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic decreased the demand for in-person health clubs and increased the demand for in-home exercise equipment such as Peloton bikes. Income. It will likely come as no surprise that changes in income affect demand, but whether a change of income causes demand for a product to increase or decrease depends on what type of good. There are two possible categories of goods related to changes in income and changes in demand. 1. Normal goods, then 2. Inferior goods. For many goods and services, an increase in income causes buyers to purchase more at any possible price. A normal good is any good in which there is a direct relationship between changes in income and its demand curve. As buyers receive higher incomes and the demand curve shifts rightwards for such normal goods such as cars, steaks, vintage and wine, cleaning surfaces, and t-shirts. A decline in income has the opposite effect, and the demand curve shifts leftward. A rise in income can, however, result in reduced purchases of goods or service of any possible price. An inferior good is any good that which there are an inverse relationship between changes in income and its demand curve. This might happen with such inferior goods such as generic brand products, spam, discount clothes, and used cars. Instead of buying these inferior goods, consumers with higher incomes buy brand name products, steaks, designer clothes, or new cars. Conversely, a fall in income causes the demand curve for inferior goods to shift rightward. Expectations of buyers. What is the effect on demand in the present when consumers anticipate future changes in price, incomes, or availability? Consider what happens if a war breaks out in the Middle East. Expectations that there will be a shortage in gasoline induce consumers to say, fill her up at every opportunity, and demand increases today. Now consider what happens if students learn that the prices of textbooks for several courses they plan to take next semester will double soon. Their likely response is to buy now, which causes an increase in the demand curve of these textbooks today. Prices of related goods. Suppose you're deciding on how much coffee to buy for a week. Your decision will likely be influenced not just by the price of the coffee, but of the price of the goods related to coffee, such as tea, which you might drink instead of coffee, or cream, which you might consume with your coffee. A substitute good competes with another good for consumer purchases. In our example, an increase in the price of tea will, as we know from the law of demand, result in a decrease in the quantity of tea being purchased. How will this decrease in the consumption of tea impact the demand for coffee? Some consumers will substitute coffee for tea, and the demand of coffee will increase, shifting the entire demand curve for coffee to the right. As you can see, then there is a direct relationship between a price change for one good, higher price of tea, and the demand for its competitor good, higher demand for coffee. A complementary good is jointly consumed with another good. In our example, an increase in the price of cream will, as we know from the law of demand, result in a decrease in the quantity of cream being purchased. How will this decrease in cream consumption impact the demand for coffee? Some consumers who put cream in their coffee will cut back on their coffee consumption, shifting the entire demand curve for coffee to the left. As you can see, then there's an inverse relationship between a price change for one good, higher price of cream, and the demand for it to go together good, coffee. It is important to be clear about our use of the term non-price determinant. The law of demand refers to changing the price of the product in question, that is, changing the price of a good that is on the horizontal axis, coffee in our example. Changing the price of another product, tea or cream in our example, is considered changing a non-price determinant because it refers to changing something other than the price of the product in the horizontal axis. Exhibit 3 summarizes the relationship between changes in non-price determinants of demand and the demand curve accompanied by examples. Exhibit 3, non-price determinants of demand. I will not go over this table in detail. Take note, changes in non-price determinants shift the demand curve, increases the the demand curve to the right, while decreases the demand shift the demand curve to the left. 3.1d. Caution movement along versus shift of the demand curve. It is important to clearly understand the distinction between a movement along the demand curve and a shift of the demand curve. Changing the price of a good causes a change in the quantity demanded. Shown as a movement along the demand curve, changing any of the non-price determinants, on the other hand, changes demand, shown as a shift of the entire demand curve. Comparing parts A and B of Exhibit 4 is helpful for making this distinction. Exhibit 4. Movement along the shift in the demand curve. Part A shows a movement along the demand curve D for t-shirts. Changing the price of t-shirts changes the quantity demanded and moves us along the demand curve. If a price is initially $15 at point A, and the quantity demanded of consumers is 20 million t-shirts. If the price then decreases to $10 at point B, the quantity demanded increases from 20 million to 30 million t-shirts. So a change in the price of t-shirts moves us along the demand curve from point A to B. Part B illustrates a shift in the demand curve for t-shirts. Changing the non-price determinant changes demand and shifts the demand curve. If incomes increase and t-shirts are normally good, demand will increase and the demand curve will shift from D1 to D2. This represents an increase in the quantity demanded at every price. At price of $15, the quantity demanded each year increases by 10 million from 20 million at point A to 30 million at point B. Similarly, at the price of $10, the quantity demanded per year also increases by 10 million to 30 million at point C to 40 million at point B. Part A shows the demand curve D for t-shirts per year. We see at point A that if the price of t-shirts is $15, the quantity demanded by consumers is 20 million t-shirts. If the price of t-shirts decreases at $10, the quantity demanded increases to 30 million, and we move to point B. So a change in the price of a good results in a change in the quantity demanded of that good, and is reflected as a movement along the demand curve for that good. In part B, suppose the market demand curve for t-shirts is additionally at D1. If the non-price determinant shifter changes, perhaps income increases and the t-shirts are normally good. Then demand will increase and they'll be shifted right from D1 to D2. This means that at all possible prices, consumers wish to purchase a larger quantity than before the shift occurred. At $15 per t-shirt, for example, 30 million t-shirts point B will be purchased each year, rather than 20 million t-shirts point A. At $10 per t-shirt, 40 million will be purchased point E, rather than 30 million point C. So a change in the non-price determinant results in the change of demand is reflected as a shift of the entire demand curve. Take note, a change in the price of the product results in a change in the quantity demanded of that product and represent a movement along the demand curve. A change in the non-price determinant results in a change of demand and is represented by a shift of the demand curve. Am I on track? 1. Which of the following would cause the demand curve for ice cream to shift to the right? A decrease in the ice cream. B, an increase in the price of popsicles. C, a new study indicating that ice cream consumption is linked to poor concentration. D, all of the above. 3-2, supply. We just saw how consumer buying decisions are represented with a demand curve. We now describe how the selling decisions of a firm are represented by a supply curve. 3-2A, the supply curve. In everyday conversations, the term supply refers to the specific quantity. A limited supply of golf clubs at a sporting goods store means that there's only so many clubs for sale, and that's all. This interpretation of supply is not the economics definition. To economics, supply is the relationship between various prices and quantities supplied. Let's think for a minute about what we have already learned. Suppose Farmer Gazebo is trying to decide whether to devote more of his land, labor, and equipment to the reduction of soybeans. Recall from Chapter 2 the reduction possibilities curve and the concept of increasing opportunity cost developed in Exhibit 3. If Farmer Gazebo devotes few of his resources to producing soybeans, the opportunity cost of, say, producing wheat is small. But increasing soybean production means a higher opportunity cost, measured by the quantity of wheat not produced. The logical question is, what would induce Farmer Gazebo to produce more soybeans for sale and overcome the higher opportunity cost of producing less wheat? You guessed it. There must be an incentive of a higher price of soybeans. The law of supply states that there's a direct relationship between the price of a good and the quantity sellers are willing to offer for sale in a defined time period, ceteris paribus. Interpreting the individual supply curve of submarts shown in Example 5 and Exhibit 5 is basically the same as interpreting Bob's demand curve shown in Exhibit 1. Each point on the supply curve represents a quantity supplied, measured along the horizontal axis, at a particular price, measured along the vertical axis. For example, at a price of $10 per t-shirt, point C, the quantity supplied by the seller, Zapmart, is 35,000 t-shirts per year. At a price of $15, the quantity supplied increases to 75,000 t-shirts per year. Exhibit 5. An individual seller supply curve for t-shirts. The supply curve for individual sellers, such as Zapmart, shows the quantity of t-shirts offered for sale at different possible prices. As the price of t-shirts rises, a retail store has the incentive to increase the quantity of t-shirts supplied per year. The direct relationship between price and quantity supplied conforms to the law of supply. Take note. A supply curve shows the different quantities of a product sellers are willing to produce and offer for sale at various prices. The positive slope of a supply curve reflects the law of supply, where an increase in the price of a product measured on the vertical axis causes an increase in the quantity supplied of the product measured on the horizontal axis. 3.2b. Market supply. To construct a market supply curve, we follow the same procedure used to derive a market demand curve. That is, we horizontally sum all the quantities supplied by individual firms at various prices that might prevail in the market. Let's assume in Exhibit 6 that Shirley's Shirts and Tommy's Tees are the only two firms selling t-shirts in a given market. At the price of $15, Shirley's Shirts will supply 15,000 t-shirts per year, point A, and Tommy's Tees will supply 25,000 t-shirts per year, point B, for a total quantity supplied of 40,000 t-shirts, point C. Exhibit 6. The market supply curve for t-shirts. Shirley's Shirts and Tommy's Tees are two businesses selling t-shirts. If these are the only two firms in the t-shirt market, the market supply curve S total can be derived by summing horizontally the individual supply curves S1 and S2. Repeating the same process for other prices guarantees the market supply curve S total. For example, at the price of $25, the total quantity supplied is 60,000 t-shirts. As with the demand, it is important to be clear with the terminology that economists use. If we change the price of t-shirts from $15 to $25, there will be a change in the quantity supplied in the market from 40,000 to 60,000 t-shirts. A change in quantity supplied is a movement from one point to another along the stationary supply curve, ceteris paribus, that results from a change in the price of the product, in this case t-shirts. Take note, a market supply curve is derived from a horizontally summing the individual supply curves of all producers in the market. 3-2c. Shifts of the supply curve. As with the demand, the price of a product is not only the factor that influences how much sellers offer for sale. If we relax the ceteris paribus assumption and allow other variables previously held constant to change, then a variety of factors can influence the position of the supply curve and cause it to shift. A change in supply is an increased rightward shift or a decreased leftward shift in the quantity supplied at each possible price. If the ceteris paribus no longer applies, we consider 5 major non-price determinants that shift the supply curve. 1. The number of sellers. 2. Technology. 3. Resource prices. 4. Expectation of sellers. 5. Prices of other goods the firm can produce. Number of sellers. What happens when a severe drought destroys wheat or frost ruins the orange crop? The damaging effect of weather may force orange growers out of business, and the supply decreases, shifting the supply curve to the left. Internationally, the United States may decide to lower trade barriers on textile imports, and this action increases the supply by allowing new foreign firms to add their individual supply curves to the U.S. market supply curve for textiles. Conversely, higher U.S. trade barriers on textiles imports shifts the U.S. market curve for textiles leftward. Technology. Never has society experienced such an explosion of new production techniques. Throughout the world, new and more efficient technology is making it possible to manufacture more products at any possible selling price. New and more powerful personal computers, PCs, reduce the production costs and so increase the supply of all sorts of goods and services. For example, computers are now milking cows. Computers emit the cows into the milking area and then activate lasers to guide the milking cups into place. Dairy farmers no longer must wake up at 5:30 a.m., and the cows get milked whenever they wish, day or night. As this technology spreads across the U.S., it will be possible to offer more milk for sale at each possible price, and the entire supply curve for milk will shift to the right. Resource prices. Natural resources, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are all required to produce products. and the prices of these resources affect supply. Suppose many firms are competing for computer programmers to design their software, and the salaries of these highly skilled workers increase. This increase in the price of labor adds to the cost of production. Along the original supply curve, extra costs must be added to each possible price. As a result, the supply of computer software shifts to the leftward, decreases, because sellers must charge more than before for the quantity supplied. Any reduction in production costs caused by a decline in the price of resources will have the opposite effect on the supply curve, and it shifts rightwards, increases. Along the original supply curve, cost decreases, so the price can be reduced at any possible quantity supplied. Expectations of sellers. As we saw with demand, expectations can affect current supply. Consider again what happens if a war breaks out in the Middle East that causes oil producers to believe that oil prices will rise dramatically. Their initial response might be to hold back a portion of oil in their storage tanks so they can sell more and make greater profits later when oil prices rise. One approach used by major oil companies might be limit the amount of gasoline delivered to independent distributors. This response by oil industries decreases supply, shifting the current supply curve to the left. As a different example, suppose farmers anticipate that the price of wheat will fall sharply. The reaction is to sell their inventory stored in silos today before the price declines tomorrow. Such a response shifts the supply curve of wheat to the right. Prices of other goods the firm could produce. Businesses are always considering shifting resources from producing one good to producing another good. A rise in the price of one product relative to the prices of another product signals to the suppliers that shifting production to the product with the higher relative price yields higher profit. Suppose the price of wheat remains the same while the price of corn rises. Because government incentives to increase ethanol production increases demand for corn, which is used to produce ethanol. Farmers will divert more of their land to corn because they can earn more profit and less to wheat. The result is an increase of the supply of corn shift to the left and an decrease in the supply of wheat shift to the left. This happens because the opportunity cost of growing wheat measured in foregone corn profits increases. Exhibit 7 summarizes the relationship between changes in the non-price determinants of supply and the supply curve, accompanied by examples for each. Take note. Changes in the non-price determinants shift the supply curve. Increases in supply will shift the supply curve to the right, and decreases in supply will shift the supply curve to the left. 3-2 D. Caution. Movement along versus shift of the supply curve. As with the demand, it is very important to clearly understand the distinction between movement along the supply curve and a shift of the supply curve. Changing the price of a good causes a change in the quantity supplied, shown as a movement along the supply curve. Changing in any non-price determinants changes supply, shown as a shift of the entire supply curve. Comparing parts A and B in Exhibit 8 helps us make this distinction. Exhibit 7. Non-price determinants of supply. I will not go over this, but you're welcome to look at it. Exhibit 8. Movement versus a shift in the supply curve. Part A represents the market supply curve as for t-shirts per year. Changing the price of t-shirts changes the quantity supplied and moves along the supply curve. If the price is initially $10 at point A, the quantity supplied by firms will be 30 million t-shirts. If the price increases to $15 at point B, the quantity supplied will increase by 30 million to 40 million t-shirts. So a change in the price of t-shirts moves along the supply curve from point A to B. Part B illustrates a shift in the supply curve for t-shirts. Changing a non-price determinant changes supply and shifts the supply curve. If there is an increase in the number of firms selling t-shirts, supplies will increase, and supply curve will shift from S1 to S2. This represents an increase in the quantity supplied at every price. At the price of $15, the quantity supplied per year increases by 10 million to 30 million at point A to 40 million at point B. Similarly, at the price of $10, the quantity supplied per year also increases by 10 million to 20 million at point C to 30 million at point D. Part A shows the supply curve S for t-shirts per year. We see at point A that if the price of t-shirts is $10, the quantity supplied by firms is 30 million t-shirts. If the price of t-shirts increases to $15, the quantity supplied increases to 40 million, and we move to point B. Notice that the change in the price of a good results in the change in the quantity supplied of that good, and is reflected as a movement along the supply curve. In point B, suppose the market supply for t-shirts initially is at S1. If a non-price determinant shifter changes, perhaps there is an increase in the number of firms selling t-shirts, then the supply will increase, and there's a shift to the right from S1 to S2. This means that at all possible prices, sellers offer a greater quantity for sale. Notice that a change in the non-price determinant results in a change in the supply, and is reflected by a shift of the entire supply curve. Take note, a change in the price of a product results in a change in the quantity supplied of that product, and is represented as a movement along the supply curve. A change in a non-price determinant results in a change in supply, and is represented by a shift in the supply curve. Am I on track? 2. Which of the following would cause the supply curve for ice cream to shift to the right? A. An increase in the price of ice cream. B. An increase in the wages paid to workers employed in making ice cream. C. A new technology that makes it cheaper and easier to produce ice cream. Or D. All of the above. 3-3 Market Equilibrium. Teach a parrot to say supply and demand, and you got economist. Understanding the interaction of supply and demand in a market is one of the most important economic skills to master. A market is any arrangement in which buyers and sellers interact to determine the price and quantity of goods and services exchanged. 3-3A Surplus versus shortage. Let's begin a study of a market by considering the retail market for sneakers. Panel A of Exhibit 9 displays a hypothetical market demand and supply data for sneakers. Notice in column 1 that the price serves as a common variable for both supply and demand relationships. Columns 2 and 3 list the quality demanded and the quality supplied for pairs of sneakers per year. These numbers, when plotted on a graph, form the demand and supply curve seen in panel B. Exhibit 9A. Demand, supply, and equilibrium for sneakers, pairs per year. I won't go over this section, but I'll go over Exhibit 9B next. Exhibit 9B. The demand and supply for sneakers. The demand and supply curves represent a market for sneakers. The intersection of the demand curve D and supply curve C at a point E indicates the equilibrium price of $60 and the equilibrium quantity of 50,000 pairs of bought and sold per year. At any price above $60, a surplus avails and pressure exists to push the price downwards. At $90, for example, the excess quantity supplied at 40,000 pairs remain unsold. Lowering the price will result in movements along the supply and demand curves, moving the market towards equilibrium. At any price below $60, a shortage provides pressure to push the price upwards. At $30, for example, the excess quantity demanded for 60,000 pairs encourages consumers to bid up the price. Raising the price will result in movements along the supply and demand curves, once again moving the market to equilibrium. The important question for market supply and demand analysis is this: which selling price and quantity will prevail in the market? Let's start by asking what will happen if retail stores supply 75,000 pairs of sneakers and charge $105 per pair. At this relatively high price for sneakers, consumers are willing to and able to purchase only 25,000 pairs. As a result, 50,000 pairs of sneakers remain unsold inventory on the shelves for sellers. Column 4. And the market condition is a surplus. Column 5. A surplus is a market condition existing at any price where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. How will retailers react to a surplus? Competition forces sellers to bid down the selling price to attract more sales. Column 6. If they cut the selling price to $90, there is still a surplus of 40,000 pairs of sneakers, and the pressure on sellers to cut their selling price will continue. If the price falls to $75, there will still be an unwanted surplus of 20,000 pairs of sneakers remaining as inventory, and pressure to charge a lower price will persist. Now, let's assume sellers slash the price of sneakers to $15 per pair. This price is very attractive to consumers, and the quantity demanded is 100,000 pairs of sneakers per year. However, sellers are willing and able to provide only 5,000 pairs at this price. Some consumers buy these 5,000 pairs of sneakers at $15, but there will remain potential buyers willing to purchase 95,000 more pairs at that price, but can't because the shoes aren't on the shelves for sale. This out-of-stock condition signals the existence of a shortage. A shortage is a market condition existing at any price where the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. In the case of shortage, unsatisfied consumers compete to obtain the product by bidding to pay a higher price. Because sellers are seeking higher profits that higher prices make possible, they gladly respond by setting a higher price of, say, $30 and increasing the quantity supplied to 20,000 pairs annually. At the price of $30, the shortage persists because the quantity demanded still exceeds the quantity supplied. Thus, a price of $30 will also be temporary because the unfilled quantity demanded provides an incentive for sellers to raise their selling price further and offer more sneakers for sale. Suppose the price of sneakers rises to $45 per pair. At this price, the shortage falls to 25,000 pairs, and the market will still give sellers the message to move upwards along the market supply curve and sell at a higher price. 3-3B. Equilibrium price and quantity. Assuming sellers are free to sell their products at any price, trial and error will make all possible price-quantity combinations unstable except at equilibrium. Equilibrium occurs at any price and quantity where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal. Economists also refer to equilibrium as market clearing. In Exhibit 9, $60 is the equilibrium price, and the 50,000 pairs of sneakers is the equilibrium quantity per year. Equilibrium means that the forces of supply and demand are in balance or at rest, and have no reason for price or quantity to change. Cerebus paribus. In short, all prices and quantities except a unique equilibrium price and quantity are temporary. Once the price of sneakers is $60, the price will not change unless a non-price factor changes demand or supply. English economist Alfred Marshall comparing supply and demand to a pair of scissors blades. He wrote, You might as reasonably dispute whether it is the upper pair or the under blade of a pair of scissors that cuts a piece of paper, as whether value is governed by utility, demand, or cost of production, supply. Joining market supply and market demand in Exhibit 9, Panel B shows us to clearly see the two blades, that is, the demand curve D and supply curve S. We can measure the amount of any surplus or shortage by the horizontal distance between the demand and supply curves. At any price above the equilibrium, say $90, there's an excess quantity supplied surplus of 40,000 pairs of sneakers. The 75,000 quantity supplied minus the 30 quantity demanded. For any price below the equilibrium, $30 for example, the horizontal distance between the curves tells us that there's an excess quantity demanded shortage of 60,000 pairs and the 80,000 quantity minus the 20,000 quantity supplied. When the price per pair is $60, the market supply curve and the market demand curve intersect at point E, and the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied at 50,000 pairs per year. At this price, there is neither a shortage nor a surplus of sneakers, and therefore no tendency to make the price to change. Take note, graphically the intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve is the market equilibrium price quantity point. This is the price where there is neither a shortage nor a surplus, and the quantity demanded exactly equals the quantity supplied. 3-3C. Rationally function of the price system. Our analysis leads to an important conclusion. The price system is a mechanism that uses the forces of supply and demand to create equilibrium through rising and falling prices. And the price system using rationally rule because the prices are established and markets distribute scarce and limited goods and services to only those who are willing and able to pay the prevailing market price. At the equilibrium price of $60, only those consumers willing and able to pay $60 per pair get sneakers. and there's no shoes for buyers unwilling or unable to pay that price. Am I on track? 3. If the price in a market is currently below equilibrium, then a blank will cause blank pressure on prices, eventually leading to equilibrium in the market. A. Shortage downward. B. Shortage upward. C. Surplus downwards. D. Surplus upwards. A closer look. Applicable concept. Price system. The market approach to organ shortages. There is a global market in human organs despite attempts to prevent these transactions. For example, China banned organ sales in 2006, and India did the same in 1994. Conversely, in Iran, regulated kidney sales for profit are legal, and currently there is no waiting list. The National Transplant Organ Act of 1984 made sale of organs illegal in the United States. Economist James R. Reinhart wrote that this following on the subject. If you were in charge of a kidney transplant program with more potential recipients than donors, how will you allocate the organs under your control? Life and death decisions can't be avoided. Some individuals are not going to get kidneys regardless of how the organs are distributed, because there's simply not enough to go around. Persons who run such programs are influenced in various ways. It would be difficult not to favor friends, relatives, influential people, and those who championed by the press. The selection process frequently takes the form of having the patient wait at home until a suitable donor is found. What this means is that at any given time, many potential recipients are just waiting for an organ to be available. In essence, the organs are rationed to those who are able to survive the wait. In many situations, patients who simply screened out because they're not considered to be suitable candidates for the transplant. For instance, patients with heart disease and overt psychosis are often excluded. Others with end-stage liver disorders are denied new organs on the grounds that the habits that produce the disease may be turned to jeopardize for recovery. Under the present arrangements, owners receive no monetary compensation. Therefore, suppliers are willing to supply fewer organs than potential recipients want. Compensating a supplier monetarily would encourage people to offer their organs for sale. It would be an excellent incentive for us to take care of our organs. After all, who would all want a large liver or a weak heart? The following illustrates the conversity. Apple CEO Steve Jobs had a temporary deliverance of death thanks to a liver transplant. This illustrates how organ donation systems can be heavily weighted against poor potential recipients. Affluent patients like Steve Jobs can win the transplant lottery by listing simultaneously in different regions to increase their odds of finding a donor. In this case, Apollo Otato, Californian, found his organ donor in Tennessee. The rules require that the prospective patient must be able to be a center within 7 or 8 hours when a organ becomes available. This means a patient must be able to afford a private jet on standby and rent a place near the hospital. Such a system can be considered highly unfair. It would be noted that it's not known if Jobs had more than one list, but this was allowed under the rules. Based on altruism, the organ donor distributing the system continued to result in shortages. In 2017, over 1,700 patients were on the waiting list for organs. When the price system is not allowed to allocate scarce resources, alternative methods are often used to alleviate the shortages. For example, some European countries such as Spain, Belgium, and Australia have implemented an opt-out organ donation system. In the opt-out system, people who are automatically considered for organ donors unless they officially declare that they do not wish to donate. Also, Facebook encourages users to advertise their donor status on their page. The rationing function of the price system, where scarce goods and services are allocated only to those who are willing and able to pay the prevailing market price, is sometimes controversial. How else do you think at least some scarce products should be distributed among seemingly unlimited wants? 3-4. Changes in market equilibrium. When you understand how buyers and sellers respond to changes in equilibrium prices, you begin to understand the economic way of thinking. Now that we've established how any market achieves equilibrium, Let's examine how changes in demand and supply can create a new market equilibrium price and quantity. Exhibit 10. The effects of shifts in demand on market equilibrium. In Part A, demand for Caribbean cruises increases because of extensive advertising, and the demand curve shifts rightwards from D1 to D2. This shift in demand causes a temporary shortage of 80,000 cruises per year at the additional equilibrium price of $600. This disequilibrium condition encourages firms in the cruise business to raise their prices, resulting in the movement upward along the supply curve by firms, and the upward movement along the new demand curve D2 by consumers to the new equilibrium at E2. Notice that the increase in demand increases the equilibrium price and increases the equilibrium quantity. Part B illustrates a decrease in the demand for gas-guzzling automobiles, SUVs, caused by a sharp rise in the price of gasoline, a complement. This leftward shift in demand from D1 to D2 resulted in a temporary surplus of 20,000 gas guzzlers per month at the additional equilibrium price of $30,000. This disequilibrium condition forces sellers of these cars to lower their prices, resulting in the movement downward along the supply curve by sellers and movement downward along the new demand curve D2 by buyers to a new equilibrium at E2. Notice that the decrease in demand decreases the equilibrium price and decreases the equilibrium quantity. 3-4A. Changes in demand. The Caribbean cruise market, shown in Exhibit 10A, assumes market supply S as constant and market demand increases from D1 to D2. Why has the demand curve shifted rightward in this figure? We will assume the popularity of cruises to these vacation islands have suddenly risen sharply due to extensive advertising and the influenced tastes and preferences. Given supply curve S and demand curve D1, the initial equilibrium price of $600 per cruise and the additional equilibrium quantity of $8,000 per year, shown at point E1. After the impact of advertising, the new equilibrium point E2 becomes 12,000 cruises per year at the price of $900 each. Thus, the increase of demand causes both the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity to increase. It is important to understand the force that caused the equilibrium to shift from E1 to E2. When demand initially increased from D1 to D2, there was a temporary shortage of 80,000 cruises at $600 per cruise. Firms in the cruise business responded to the excess demand by hiring more workers, offering more cruises to the Caribbean, and raising the price. The cruise lines therefore move upward along the supply curve, increasing quantity supplied, but not changing supply. Similarly, consumers respond to the prices increased by moving upward along the demand curve, decreasing quantity demanded, but not changing demand. During some period of trial and error, Caribbean cruise sellers increase their price until a shortage no longer exists at point E2. Therefore, the increase in demand causes both the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity to increase. Note the importance of what we've already learned about the laws of demand and supply. In this example, as producers increased the price in response to the shortage, the price change resulted in a movement along each of the curves that brought us to the new equilibrium. What will happen to the demand for gas-guzzling automobiles, for example SUVs, if the price of gasoline triples? Because gasoline and automobiles are complements, the rise in the price of gasoline decreases the demand for gas guzzlers from D1 to D2 in Exhibit 10B. At the initial equilibrium price of $30,000 per gas guzzler, the quantity supplied now exceeds the quantity demanded of 20,000 automobiles per month. This unwanted inventory forces automakers to reduce the price. This results in a movement downward along the supply curve by firms and downward along the demand curves by consumers. The market equilibrium changes from E1 to E2. As the equilibrium price falls from 30,000 to 20,000, the equilibrium quantity falls from 20,000 to 30,000 gas guzzlers per month. Am I on track? 4. An increase in demand initially creates a blank at the original price, and price will blank over time. 3-4B. Changes in supply. Now reverse the analysis by assuming demand remains constant. It allows some non-price determinant to shift the supply curve. In Exhibit 11A, begin at point E1 in the market for babysitting services at an equilibrium price of $9 per hour and 4,000 babysitters hired per month. Then assume there's a geographic shift and the number of people available to babysit rises. This increases the number of sellers shift the market supply curve rightwards to S1 to S2 and creates a temporary surplus of 40,000 babysitters at the initial equilibrium price of $9 who offer their services but are not hired. The unemployed babysitters respond to reducing the price, which is a movement downward along S2, as fewer babysitters are available for hire at a lower price, and the downward along D as parents want to hire more babysitters at a lower price. When the price falls from $6 per hour, the market is in equilibrium again at point E2 instead of E1. The consumers hire 60,000 babysitters per month. Exhibit 11. The effects of shifts in supply on the market equilibrium. In Part A, begin at equilibrium 1, E1, in the market for babysitters, and assume an increase in the number of babysitters shift the supply curve rightwards from S1 to S2. This shift in supply causes a temporary surplus of 40,000 unemployed babysitters per month. This disequilibrium condition causes a decrease in price, which results in a movement downwards along the demand curve and downward along the new supply curve, S2, to the new equilibrium at E2. Overall, at E2, the equilibrium price is lower, and the equilibrium quantity is greater compared to E1. In Part B, steps to protect the environment cause the supply curve for lumber to shift downwards from S1 to S2. This shift in supply results in a temporary shortage of 40 million board per feet per year. Customer binding for available lumber rises the price. As a result, the market moves upward along the demand curve and upwards along the new supply curve S2 to the new equilibrium at E2. Overall, at E2, the equilibrium price is higher and the quantity is lower than E1. Exhibit 11B. Illustrate the market for lumber. Suppose this market is at equilibrium at point E1, where the going price is 400 per 1,000 board feet, and 8 billion board feet are bought and sold per year. Now suppose a new Endangered Species Act is passed, and the federal government sets aside huge forest resources to protect the spotted owl and other wildlife. This means the market supply curve shifts leftwards from S1 to S2, and a temporary shortage of 40 billion board feet of lumber exists at an additional equilibrium price of $400. Suppliers respond by increasing their price from $400 to $600 per 1,000 board feet. And a new equilibrium is established at E2, where the equilibrium quantity is 6 billion board feet per year. Exhibit 12 gives a concise summary of the impact of changes in demand and supply on the market equilibrium. Exhibit 12. Summary of curve shifts on the equilibrium price and quantity. Change. Demand increases, demand decreases, supply increases, or supply decreases. Effect on equilibrium price. Increases, decreases, decreases, increases. Effect on equilibrium quantity. Increases, decreases, increases, decreases. 3-4C. Simultaneous changes in demand and supply. We have seen what happens if there is a single curve that shifts in the market. But often the real world is more complicated and changes can occur simultaneously in a market. How can we determine the impact of an equilibrium price and quantity if there's more than one curve shifts? Exhibit 12 will help guide us to an answer. Let's consider the market for coffee and think about what happens if both households' incomes decrease and the coffee is a normal good, and simultaneously there is an increase in coffee leaf rush, a fungus that destroys many coffee plants. We know that these developments will cause both a decrease in demand and decrease in supply. Let's use Exhibit 12 to help us identify the overall impact on price and quantity when both of these changes occur simultaneously. The second rule of Exhibit 12 reminds us that a decrease in demand alone results in a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity. The fourth row reminds us that a decrease in supply alone results in an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. So combining allows us to see what happens if they both occur simultaneously. We can say with certainty that quantity will decrease because both the demand decrease and the supply decrease will decrease the equilibrium quantity. However, we cannot say with certainty what will happen to the price. The decrease in demand will cause prices to fall, while the decrease in supply will cause prices to rise. Without additional information about which is bigger impact, demand or supply, we cannot simply determine what will happen to the equilibrium price in this situation. Key terms: law of demand, demand curve, change in quantity demanded, change in demand, normal good, inferior good, law of supply, supply curve, change in quantity supplied, change in supply, market, surplus, shortage, equilibrium, price system. Summary: the law of demand states that there's an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded, ceteris paribus. A market demand curve is the horizontal summation of an individual demand curves. A change in quantity demanded is a movement along a stationary demand curve caused by a change in price. A change in demand occurs when any of the non-price determinants of demand change, which causes the demand curve to shift. An increase in demand, rightward shift, or a decrease in demand, leftward shift, is caused by a change in one of the non-price determinants. Non-price determinants of demand are as follows: A. Number of buyers, B. Taste and preferences, C. Income, normal and inferior goods, D. Expectations of future price and income changes, E. Prices of related goods, substitutes and complements. The law of supply states that there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied, ceteris paribus. The market supply curve is a horizontal summation of individual supply curves. And change in quantity supplied is a movement along a stationary supply curve caused by a change in price. A change in supply occurs when any of the non-price determinants of supply change, when shifts of the supply curve. An increase in supply, rightward shift, or a decrease in the supply, leftward shift, is caused by a change in one of the non-price determinants. Non-price determinants of suppliers are as follows: A. Number of sellers, B. Technology, C. Resource prices, D. Expectations of future prices, E. Prices of other goods and services. A surplus or shortage exists when at any price where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are not equal. When the price of a good is higher than the equilibrium price, there's an excess quantity supplied or surplus. When the price is less than the equilibrium price, there's an excess quantity demanded or shortage. Equilibrium is the unique price and quantity established at the intersection of supply and demand curves. Only at equilibrium does the quantity demanded equal quantity supplied. The price system is supply and demand mechanism that establish equilibrium through the ability of prices to rise and fall. A shift in one of the curves results in a new equilibrium price, and quantity is summarized in the table. To determine impact of two curves shifting simultaneously, combine the appropriate rows in the table. Take note: a demand curve shows different quantities of products consumers are willing to purchase at various prices. The negative slope of a demand curve reflects the law of demand, where the decrease of the price of product, measured on the vertical axis, causes an increase in the quantity demanded of that product, measured by the horizontal axis. A market demand curve is derived by horizontally summing the individual demand curves of all consumers in the market. Changes in non-price determinants shift the demand curve, causing demand curve to the right, while decreases in the demand shift the demand curve to the left. A change in the price of a product results in a change in the quantity demanded of the product and represented as movement along the demand curve. A change in the non-price determinant results in a change in demand, which is represented by a shift of the demand curve. A supply curve shows the different quantities of a product sellers are willing to produce and offer for sale at various prices. The positive slope of a supply curve reflects the law of supply, where an increase in the price of a product, measured on the vertical axis, causes an increase in quantity supplied of that product, measured on the horizontal axis. A market supply curve is derived by horizontally summing the individual supply curves of all producers in the market. Changes in non-price determinants shift the supply curve, resulting in a supply will shift the supply curve to the right, while decreases in supply will shift the supply curve to the left. A change in the price of a product results in a change in the supply quantity supplied of the product and is represented by a movement along the supply curve. A change in the non-price determinant results in a change in supply and is represented by a shift of the supply curve. Graphically, the intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve is the market equilibrium price quantity point. This is the point where there are either a shortage or a surplus and quantity demanded exactly equals quantity supplied. Study questions and problems. Please see Appendix A for answers to odd-numbered questions. Your instructor has access to the answers for even-numbered questions. 1. Some people pay a higher price for brand-name goods. For example, some people may buy Rolls-Royce cars and Rolex watches to impress others. Does unknowingly paying higher prices for certain items just to be snob violate the law of demand? 2. Draw graphs that illustrate the difference between a decrease in the quantity demanded and a decrease in the demand for Mickey Mouse baseball cards. Give a possible reason for change in each graph. Suppose oil prices rise sharply for years as a result of the war in the Persian Gulf region. What happens? Why does to the demand for each of the following: cars, home installation, coal, tires. 4. Draw graphs to illustrate the difference between a decrease in quantity supplied and decrease in supply for condiments. Give a possible reason for the change in each graph. 5. Suppose war in the Middle East threatened oil supplies and gasoline prices began rising. Consumers feared future oil shortages, so they rushed to fill up their gas tanks. In this case, as the price of gas increases, consumers bought more, not less. Is this an exception of the law of demand? Predict the direction of change for either supply or demand in each of the following situations. A. Several companies enter the cell phone industry. B. Consumers suddenly decide SUVs are unfashionable. C. Frost threatens to damage a coffee crop, and consumers expect the price to rise sharply in the future. D. The price of tea falls. What is the effect on the coffee market? E. The price of sugar falls. Rises. What is the effect on the coffee market? F. A new type of robot is invented and will pick up peaches. 7. There is a shortage of college baseball and football tickets for some games, and surplus occurs for other games. Why do shortages and surpluses exist for different games? Assume ticket prices are the same for all the team's home games during the season. 8. Explain why the market price may not be the same as the equilibrium price. 9. Explain the statement, people respond to incentives and disincentives, in relation to the demand curve and supply curve and for good X. 10. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the price system? 11. Suppose a market is in equilibrium and both demand and supply curves increase. What happens to the equilibrium price if demand increases more than supply? Am I on the right track? 1B, 2C, 3B, 4D. Sample quiz. Please see Appendix B for answers to sample questions. 1. Which of the following causes the demand for veggie burgers to increase? A. A decline in the price of veggie burgers. B. An increase in the price of tofu burgers perceived as a substitute by veggie burger consumers. C. An increase in the price of burger buns. D. An increase in innovation that lowers the cost of producing veggie burgers. 2. Suppose each of the 7 dwarfs buys 4 mugs of ginger ale per week from Snow White's Cafe, when the price per mug is $2. If the 7 dwarfs are in the entire market demand for Snow White's ginger ale, which of the following is the correct value for market quality demanded for ginger ale per week at a price of $2? A. 4, B. 8, C. 28, D. 7. 3. Which of the following increases the supply for corn? A. A farmers' worker union successfully negotiates a pay increase for corn harvest workers. B. The Surgeon General announces that eating corn contributes to heart disease. C. Congress and the President eliminate subsidies formerly paid to corn farmers. D. Farmers who grow soybeans can also grow corn, and the price of soybeans drops by 75%. 4. With the upward sloping supply curve, which of the following is true? A. An increase in price results in a decrease in the quantity supplied. B. An increase in price results in a increase in supply. C. A decrease in price results in a decrease of quantity supplied. D. A decrease in price results in an increase in supply. 5. A surplus occurs when A. The quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. B. Price is below the equivalent price. C. Price is at the equivalent. D. Price is above the equivalent. 6. A shortage occurs when the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. B. Price is shown below the equilibrium price. C. Price is at the equilibrium. D. Price is above the equilibrium. 7. Which of the following decreases supply in the market for pizza? A. Pizza shop employees successfully organize a union and negotiate a pay increase. B. The Surgeon General announces that eating pizza reduces the incidence of stomach cancer. C. Cheese prices drop because price supports for dairy farmers are removed. D. Some hot sandwich shops can also make and sell pizza, and consumer demands for hot sandwiches decline sharply, reducing the probability of reducing hot sandwiches. 8. Which of the following results from an increase in the price of a one-week vacation at beach resorts on the coast of Mexico? A. An increase in supply of bicycle tires in Toledo, Ohio. B. An increase in demand for vacations at resorts on the Caribbean islands. C. An increase in supply and vacations opportunities at resorts on the coast of Mexico. D. A decrease in demand for vacations at resorts on the Caribbean islands. 9. There is news that the price of Tucker's root beer will increase significantly next week. The demand for Tucker's root beer reacts only to this factor and shifts to the rise. The position of this demand curve has reaction change in A. Taste. B. Income levels. C. The prices of related goods. D. The number of buyers. E. Expectations. 10. Which of the following causes a shortage to become larger? A. An increase in market price. B. An increase in supply. C. A decrease in demand. Or C. A decrease in price. 11. The law of demand is the principle that there is blank relationship between the price of a good and the quantity buyers are willing to purchase in a defined time period. Cerebus paribus. A. A direct. B. No. C. An inverse. D. An independent. 12. A curve that is derived by summing horizontally individual demand curves is called A. Aggregate supply. B. Market supply. C. Aggregate demand. Or D. Market demand. 13. A leftward shift in the demand curve is called A. Decrease in demand. B. Decrease in quantity demand. C. Increase in demand. Or D. Increase in quantity demanded. Under the law of demand, any increase in price will cause blank in quantity demanded. A. A decrease. B. An increase. C. No change. Or D. Constant change. The law of supply is the principle that the relationship between the price of a good and the quantities of sellers are willing to offer for sale in a defined time period, cerebus paribus, is A. Inverse. B. Direct. C. No relationship. Or D. Independent. 16. Exhibit 13 presents supply and demand data for a video game market. If the price of a video game is currently $70, there would be a blank of blank video games in the market. A. Access demand 450. B. Access demand 500. C. Access supply 400. D. Access supply 850. E. Access demand 400. 17. In Exhibit 13, at any market price of video games below $50 and blank would result in causing the price to blank. A. Access demand rise. B. Access supply rise. C. Access demand fall. Or D. Access supply fall. 18. In Exhibit 13, if there is a shortage of video games of 200 units, the current price of video games must be A. 60, B. 55, C. 50, D. 45, or E. 40. and decrease in demand with the supply held constant leads to an A. Increased equilibrium price and increased equilibrium quantity. B. Decreased equilibrium price and decreased equilibrium quantity. C. Decreased equilibrium price and increased equilibrium quantity. Or D. Increased equilibrium price and decreased equilibrium quantity. 20. An increased equilibrium price and decreased equilibrium quantity result from an A. Decrease in demand, B. Increase in supply, C. Decrease in supply, or D. Increase in demand. 21. Suppose X and Y are substitutes. If the price of Y increases, how will the change of the market equilibrium for X? A. Both equilibrium price and quantity decline. B. Both equilibrium price and quantity rise. Equilibrium price decreases and equilibrium quantity rises. D. Equilibrium price rises and equilibrium quantity falls. 22. If the cost of producing a good rises for sellers, how will this affect the market equilibrium for that good? A. Price will fall when quantity will fall. B. Price will fall and quantity will rise. C. Both price and quantity will rise. D. Both price and quantity will fall. 23. Suppose the average equilibrium monthly rental price for apartments and rooms in a college town has been studied at $600, but then the college expands enrollment from 10,000 to 12,000. Suddenly there's a surge in renting housing at prevailing price of $600. Which of the following is most likely true? A. A surge occurs because demand increases, and a new market equilibrium will feature higher rental prices and more rental units available on the market. B. A shortage occurred because the supply increased, and a new market equilibrium will feature lower rental prices and fewer rental units available on the market. C. A shortage occurred because demand decreases, and a new market equilibrium will feature lower rental prices and fewer rental units available on the market. D. The shortage occurred because demand increased, and a new market equilibrium will feature high rental prices and fewer rental units available on the market. 24. Consider the market for pineapples initially in equilibrium. Then a new study comes out indicating that eating pineapples lowers cholesterol, while simultaneously there is a drought that causes a poor pineapple crop. In this situation, demand will blank, and simultaneously supply will blank. A. Increase, B. Decrease, C. Decrease, or D. Decrease. 25. Consider the market for pineapples initially in equilibrium. Then a new study comes out indicating that eating pineapple lowers cholesterol, while simultaneously there's a drought that causes poor pineapple crop. As a result, equilibrium price blank and equilibrium quantity blank. A. Will rise, may fall. Will rise, may rise, fall, or stay the same. B. May rise, fall, or stay the same, will rise. C. Will fall, may rise, fall, or stay the same. D. May rise, fall, or stay the same, and will fall.